The aliens laughed. A human plant? On their world? It wouldn't last a day. They had no idea they had just sealed their doom. The Virzel prided themselves on their superior technology and vast knowledge of planetary ecosystems. Their world, Sci-Fi, was a jewel of controlled nature, every plant, every organism, genetically engineered to perfection. Weeds did not exist. Evolution was no longer random. They had long since mastered life itself. So when the small, leafy green plant was introduced into one of their controlled environments, the idea that it could pose any sort of threat was laughable. "It's from Earth, of all places," one scientist sneered, waving his six-fingered hand dismissively. "A primitive world where species still fight to survive without our advancements. This thing is nothing more than a curiosity." The plant had arrived through an intergalactic research exchange, part of an ongoing program where different species shared non-threatening biological samples. It was called kudzu, an earth plant, supposedly invasive, though the Virzel hardly believed it. "A weed," another researcher mused, studying its vine-like structure under magnification. "It spreads aggressively on Earth, but that's a planet of chaos. Here, it has no chance." With that, they planted it in a controlled environment, expecting it to wither and die within days. But the days passed. And the plant didn't die. At first, they paid little attention. It was just a small sprout, no different from countless others they had studied. The growth rate was slightly higher than expected, but still within manageable limits. "Curious," one scientist finally noted. "It's adapting well. Perhaps more than we anticipated." A week later, the plant had doubled in size. A few of the younger researchers raised concerns. "It shouldn't be growing this fast. The atmospheric conditions here are different, and it should lack the necessary nutrients to sustain such rapid expansion." The senior scientists brushed them off. "This is a controlled environment. If it gets out of hand, we'll simply eradicate it." Another week passed. The kudzu was no longer confined to its designated section of the lab. It had begun creeping beyond its enclosure, tendrils extending outward, climbing the smooth metallic walls, seeking light, water, anything to fuel its growth. By the third week, it had breached containment. By the fourth, it had found its way into the ventilation system. And for the first time, the Virzel realized something was terribly, terribly wrong. The plant wasn't just growing. It was adapting. And it had no intention of stopping. Panic had not yet set in, but unease rippled through the Virzel research station. What had begun as a simple curiosity, a mere weed from a primitive planet, was now causing unexpected complications. The kudzu had spread beyond its initial containment, weaving its way through the walls, creeping along the pristine, sterile floors. The plant moved with an almost unnatural determination, slithering up metallic support beams like a silent invader. "Terminate it," ordered lead researcher Volix, his voice calm but firm. The junior scientists obeyed without question. The plant had grown beyond its intended limits, but the Virzel were the masters of genetic manipulation. Destroying an unwanted organism was routine. They deployed chemical agents designed to break down biological material at a molecular level, substances that had sterilized entire invasive species in past experiments. The results were unsettling. The plant recoiled momentarily, its leaves shriveling, tendrils curling in on themselves. A sense of relief swept through the research team. Then, before their very eyes, it began to heal. Not just recover, evolve. Its structure changed, thickening, hardening. The leaves darkened, a subtle shift in pigmentation occurring in real time as the plant absorbed the toxins, neutralizing them. One of the scientists took an unconscious step back. That shouldn't be possible. Volix narrowed his reptilian eyes. Increase the dose. Flood the chamber. They obeyed. Within moments, the containment zone was saturated with deadly levels of the biological suppressant. This time, they watched closely, expecting total eradication. The kudzu withered. Shrank. Then it sprouted again. Faster. Stronger. This time, its vines moved with purpose. It reached toward the vents, spreading like living veins across the walls. Something deep in Volix's gut twisted, a rare, unsettling feeling. The Virzel prided themselves on being a logical species. There was no room for irrational fear. But this was different. Seal the lab. Now. Containment fails. Alarms blared. The research facility's automated security system responded to the breach, triggering lockdown protocols. Steel barriers slammed down over exits, sealing the kudzu within its designated chamber. But the plant had already found a way out. As the Virzel scrambled to react, the first signs of invasion became clear. Kudzu tendrils had already infiltrated the air filtration system. And it was spreading at an exponential rate. The plant didn't merely grow, it adapted. Every attempt to hinder its progress only seemed to make it stronger. The once mocking researchers were no longer laughing. "How did we not see this coming?" one muttered, eyes wide with disbelief. Volix's mind raced. The Virzel had encountered countless species, studied thousands of ecosystems across the galaxy. They had seen parasites, predators, diseases, but never something like this. Something so relentless. Something that refused to die. The call for help. With containment failing, Volix made a decision that no Virzel scientist wanted to make. He activated the distress beacon. "This is lead researcher Volix of the Sci-Fi Science Division. We have an ongoing biological containment failure. Requesting immediate intervention. Priority Alpha." The response was swift. "Understood, Research Station Theta, 9. Stand by. Fleet en route." Volix exhaled. The kudzu had breached their facility, but surely, with military intervention, they could eradicate the threat. After all, it was just a plant. Right? The Virzel fleet arrived within hours, their massive warships descending upon Research Station Theta, 9 with swift precision. The moment they received the distress signal, they assumed the station had fallen prey to an organic infestation, a minor inconvenience at best. Their mistake was underestimating the enemy. A simple eradication mission? Commander Zalvek stood on the bridge of the Vigilant Fong, overseeing the mission with practiced ease. His fleet was equipped with the most advanced biological containment measures in the known galaxy. No pathogen, parasite, or rogue experiment had ever escaped their cleansing operations. As he observed the station on the main screen, he sneered. "All this for a primitive plant?" He scoffed. "Have the scientists completely lost their spines?" The transmission from Volix crackled through the speakers, filled with uncharacteristic urgency. "Commander, you don't understand. This is no ordinary organism. Our weapons are making it stronger." Zalvek barely stifled a laugh. "Then you simply aren't using the right weapons." Volix's voice cut through the static again, more frantic this time. "Commander, listen to me." The transmission was suddenly interrupted. Static. Silence. Then, a low, rustling sound. Zalvek frowned. He turned to his second-in-command. "Send in the first wave. Burn everything. Fire and fury." Hundreds of elite Virzel troops landed at the research facility, deploying plasma incinerators designed to vaporize organic matter. The plan was simple: burn the kudzu down to its roots. Within minutes, towering walls of fire raged across the station's corridors. The Virzel soldiers watched with satisfaction as the kudzu curled and blackened, its vines withering under the heat. "That's the end of that," one soldier muttered. Then, the ashes began to move. Tendrils, still smoldering, twitched, then grew back faster than before. The scorched vines turned black and metallic, their surfaces glistening unnaturally. The plant had absorbed the energy. Then it struck back. A wave of vines erupted from the floor, wrapping around the nearest squad of soldiers. Their weapons fired wildly, but the kudzu was too fast. It twisted around their armor, yanking them off their feet. Screams filled the comms. The plant wasn't just defending itself, it was learning. Escape is no longer an option. Commander Zalvek watched in horror from the ship's monitors. His best troops, overrun in minutes. A sinking realization dawned upon him. The kudzu wasn't just spreading. It was hunting. Zalvek turned to his crew, his voice grim. Prepare the orbital bombardment. We're purging the entire station. A young officer hesitated. Sir, there are still survivors. They are already dead. The kudzu's greatest trick. The vigilant Fong's weapons locked on to the research station. The moment the order was given, a torrential wave of plasma fire would rain down, reducing everything to dust. But just as Zalvek opened his mouth to give the command, the ship's power flickered. Warning alarms blared. Sir, an officer shouted. Something is inside the main engine, it's organic. Zalvek's eyes widened in disbelief. The kudzu was already on the ship. The battle was over. And the Virzel had already lost. The vigilant Fong trembled as power systems flickered erratically. Red emergency lights bathed the bridge in a sinister glow, alarms blaring in overlapping tones. Commander Zalvek gripped the command console, his mandibles clicking in growing frustration. Status report. Now, he barked. A frantic officer's voice came through the speakers. Sir, we're losing control of the main thrusters. Some kind of biomass, is spreading through the ship's conduits. It's absorbing energy from our systems. Zalvek's eyes narrowed. The kudzu had somehow breached their defenses, not through brute force, but by adapting faster than any known organism. The silent invasion. Below the command deck, engineering teams fought a losing battle. Kudzu tendrils slithered through vents, pulsing with eerie bioluminescence. The vines spread like a living circulatory system, attaching themselves to power conduits, draining energy, and redirecting it to grow stronger. One engineer panicked as he saw his console display. Power drain, 72%. 85%. 94%. Desperation set in. Shut it down. Shut it all down. But it was too late. With a low, organic groan, the ship lurched sideways, losing artificial gravity. Engineers and officers floated helplessly as the kudzu wrapped around the reactor core. Containment protocol, failure. Zalvek turned to his security chief. Initiate ship-wide sterilization, maximum intensity. A moment later, the vigilant Fong's interior was flooded with scorching plasma bursts, meant to incinerate any biological threat. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, the kudzu adapted again. Its outer layer hardened, darkening into a metallic sheen. It was no longer just a plant, it was learning to resist their weapons. Then the ship's entire power grid failed. The bridge fell into total darkness. The kudzu speaks. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, a frequency that vibrated in Zalvek's skull, like a voice pressing against his mind. We grow. Zalvek stiffened. Kudzu was not just evolving, it was becoming aware. We consume. The ship shuddered violently, as if gripped by an unseen force. Zalvek realized with dawning horror. The kudzu was steering the ship. Course change, planet Virzel. An officer's voice cracked in terror. Commander. Navigation systems are being overridden. The ship, it's it's setting a course for our homeworld. Zalvek's blood ran cold. The kudzu wasn't just attacking them. It was following them home. The vigilant Fong tore through the void of space, its damaged hull groaning under the strain of the uncontrollable kudzu invasion. The ship was no longer the proud vessel of the Virzelian Empire. It had become a crawling nightmare, a decaying thing, as the vine spread deeper into the core, overriding any efforts to halt their advance. The crew was scattered across the ship, trying in vain to contain the relentless growth of the kudzu. Commander Zalvek stood on the bridge, his hands shaking, his mind reeling. He could feel the pulse of the kudzu beneath his feet, as though it were alive, watching, listening. He couldn't escape the growing sense of dread. The ship's AI, once a calm, dispassionate entity, now hummed in a constant, unsettling tone. Planet Virzel in range. Course correction complete. Arrival in 24 hours. Zalvek closed his eyes, clenching his jaw. The planet, the people. They'll never survive this. He punched a button on the control panel, opening a communication channel to the Virzelian homeworld. He barely recognized his own voice when it crackled through the speaker. This is Commander Zalvek of the Vigilant Fong. You must evacuate the planet. The kudzu is coming. It will consume everything. But the message was too late. The end of a civilization. The capital of Virzel, a sprawling city of gleaming towers and advanced technology, was still bustling as the first vine struck. They crept from the ground, silent and insidious, wrapping around the city's great monuments, tearing apart steel and stone like paper. By the time the first citizens realized the danger, it was already too late. The kudzu had infected the planet's ecosystems, spreading through the forests, cities, and even the underground systems. Within hours, it was everywhere. The once vibrant world was becoming a graveyard, a place where life would soon be devoured by the very thing they had dismissed as a trivial human plant. Zalvek had seen nothing like it. No predator, no warship, no weapon could compare to the overwhelming force of nature they had underestimated. The kudzu was unstoppable, and now it was closing in on the planet's surface. The very air itself seemed to pulse with energy, and a low hum filled the atmosphere, a reminder of the creature's terrifying power. Desperation sets in. With time running out, Zalvek gathered the surviving officers in the emergency control room. The kudzu had completely taken over the ship, but they were still able to retain control of one small communication system. The officer in charge of communications spoke with dread. "Commander, we've made contact with the remaining cities. They're already evacuating as much as they can. But the kudzu is everywhere, spreading faster than we can even track. We're not going to make it." Zalvek, his hands trembling, realized the truth. There was no escaping this. There was no rescue. The planet would fall, just as the ship had. The kudzu was far beyond anything they could have imagined. The irony of humankind's legacy. Zalvek's thoughts turned back to the human plant, the kudzu. He remembered how the other species had scoffed at the tiny, fragile-looking plant, dismissing it as nothing more than a weak, unimportant organism. How could something so simple, so humble, bring such devastation? It wasn't just the kudzu that had won, it was the irony of it. The fact that humankind's forgotten legacy had brought the downfall of an entire galaxy. They had underestimated the strength of what they saw as weak. And now, as Zalvek looked down at the planet, he knew the truth: humanity's most innocuous creation had become their greatest weapon. The final hour. As Zalvek watched the planet Virzel grow closer, he began to resign himself to the inevitable. There would be no grand escape, no last-minute heroism. The kudzu had won, and it would consume everything in its path. He could feel the rumble beneath his feet. The kudzu was now inside the planet's atmosphere. It was only a matter of time before the entire world was engulfed. And with the final breath of the vigilant Fong, the kudzu would spread beyond the stars. But there was a strange peace in his acceptance. In the end, it had been the humility of humanity, their small and underestimated creations, that had conquered them all. The kudzu was not the end, but the beginning of something new. Something unseen. Something beyond their understanding. And with that thought, he closed his eyes, preparing for the final impact. The kudzu's reach had spread beyond the stars. Entire fleets of Virzelian ships had been lost, their destruction too rapid to comprehend. The invasion had outpaced even the most advanced technologies, reducing their once mighty civilization to desperate survivors clinging to a doomed hope. In the final days, the leaders of the remaining Virzelian survivors gathered in the last stronghold, a colony moon orbiting their homeworld. It was a desperate place, a cold, barren world that would never have been a home if not for the impending doom. The moon was their last stand, and they knew it. Zalvek, still clinging to the command of what remained of the vigilant Fong, had moved the final survivors of his crew to the moon's surface. Their defenses, once advanced enough to repel the most aggressive invaders, had become little more than a symbol of their hubris. The great iron gates of the colony opened with a groan, and Zalvek stepped out into the frigid, alien atmosphere. The cold was biting, the wind harsh, but it felt almost like a comfort. In the distance, the once glorious skyline of Virzel had already been swallowed by the kudzu's relentless growth. The dark vines stretched like tendrils, reaching up toward the sky, a haunting reminder of the power they had ignored. Zalvek stared at the destruction, the reality of it finally setting in. No more planets, no more ships, no more people. He wasn't just fighting for his survival anymore, he was fighting for a future that might never come. The kudzu had no mercy, and no matter how they fought, it would continue to spread. As he turned to face the surviving officers, a heavy silence hung in the air. They all knew the truth now. This was the end. The final hope. But Zalvek refused to give in. Not yet. There was one final card to play, something the Virzelian scientists had been working on before the kudzu's arrival had destroyed their homeworld. It wasn't much, but it was all they had left, a kudzu inhibitor. The plan was simple: deploy the inhibitor into the heart of the kudzu's mass, infect its core, and destroy the source from the inside. It wasn't guaranteed, and even the scientists didn't fully understand what the kudzu's true nature was. But it was the only hope they had. Zalvek and his team prepared for the final mission. They would infiltrate the kudzu's territory, fighting their way through the once beautiful forests now turned into horrific jungles, seeking out the heart of the kudzu. They would launch the inhibitor directly into its core and, hopefully, destroy the root of all this madness. But the odds were against them. The kudzu had become a living organism, spreading with unnatural speed and overwhelming power. No one had any illusions about success. But they still went. They had no choice. The battle for survival. The journey to the kudzu core was long and harrowing. Zalvek's group fought their way through the twisting vines, cutting through the thick, suffocating growth that sought to entrap them. Every step was a struggle. Every movement, a battle against the growing forces of nature that now felt more like a living beast than just a plant. It was like wading through a nightmare. The kudzu wasn't just attacking, it was pursuing, hunting them, sensing their presence like a predator closing in on its prey. Every member of the team was on edge, their nerves frayed from the unrelenting pressure. The vines grew thicker, wrapping around their bodies, trying to drag them down into the earth below. But they kept moving forward. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they arrived at the heart of the kudzu's mass, a gigantic central tree that seemed to pulse with life. It was massive, taller than any structure they'd ever seen, with roots spreading across the entire landscape like a spiderweb. The tree's branches reached high into the sky, glowing with an eerie, green light. This was the kudzu's core, the source of the destruction. Zalvek and his team didn't hesitate. They placed the inhibitor device at the base of the tree, the last hope of the Virzelian race. The countdown began. And then, nothing. The kudzu began to writhe. The vines recoiled, pulling back, retreating from the device, as if the inhibitor was affecting its very essence. For the first time in months, Zalvek allowed himself to feel hope. The twist, the kudzu's evolution. But the hope didn't last long. The kudzu wasn't defeated. Instead, it had evolved. The inhibitor didn't kill it, it triggered an adaptation, accelerating the kudzu's natural defenses in ways the Virzelians couldn't have predicted. The plant became intelligent, its vines began to act with purpose, and it attacked with unholy fury. The ground beneath their feet shook violently, and in an instant, the entire team was separated. Zalvek screamed into the communication device, trying to reach the others, but the sound was drowned out by the roar of the kudzu. It was no longer just a plant, it had become a living force, a consciousness with a singular goal, survival. And the Virzelians, in their arrogance, had made a grave mistake by underestimating this ancient force. The devastation was unimaginable. The kudzu's retaliatory strike was swift and unrelenting. What was once a team of brave warriors fighting to save their people was now scattered, fighting for their very survival in an alien, hostile world. Zalvek, who had once believed in the superiority of his race and their technology, found himself face to face with an adversary that defied all logic and reason. As he struggled to stay connected with the few survivors who remained, Zalvek realized that no technology, no matter how advanced, could ever replace the one thing that had always been the true strength of his people, their resilience. A new understanding. Zalvek had always considered himself and his people to be the pinnacle of evolution. They had conquered their own planet and advanced their technology to the point of reaching the stars. But the arrival of the kudzu had shattered that belief. It wasn't technology or weapons that would save them, it was something far more intangible. It was adaptability, unity, and the will to survive against all odds. Through the chaos, as the team scattered and struggled to escape the deadly vines, one of Zalvek's crew members, his closest ally, had an epiphany. She found herself not fighting against the kudzu's growth, but working with it, understanding its natural patterns, reading the way it moved, the way it thought. She realized the key to defeating the kudzu wasn't a weapon, but a method of coexistence, finding a way to turn the kudzu's strength into a resource for their survival. The inhibitor had failed, but in its failure, it had unlocked a new path. The kudzu could be redirected, tamed. It was a living organism, and it was willing to adapt as much as they were. They didn't have to destroy it, they could find a way to work with it, and restore balance. Sacrifice and resolution. In the final moments, when the kudzu's vines closed in on their last remaining stronghold, Zalvek made a difficult decision. He realized that it wasn't just about defeating the kudzu, it was about living with it, learning from its resilience. They couldn't destroy the planet to save themselves. Instead, they had to adapt, evolve, and find a way to coexist with the unstoppable force they had once feared. With the last remaining crew members by his side, Zalvek transmitted the key data, the insights about the kudzu's natural flow, back to the surviving Virzelian colonies. They would no longer fight against nature, they would use their understanding of it to thrive. The struggle for dominance had to give way to cooperation. Zalvek knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be sacrifices. But his people had learned the hardest lesson of all: strength isn't in fighting, strength is in adapting.